She was a lord's daughter, and a secret weapon her father never meant to fire. Sigrid carried warmth in her left palm since the age of 9. A healing gift, ancient and instinctive, capable of closing wounds and reading the cold places inside a person, the way sunlight reads shadows. For 14 years, her father had kept it buried, not out of love, but out of calculation, because a daughter with a gift was an asset, and assets were most valuable when no one else knew what they were worth. What Sigrid did not know, not yet, was that her father had already decided how she would be spent. The Alpha King of Halvard was dying slowly, not by blade, not by poison, by design. A 500-year-old seal had been placed on his bloodline, locking love and the healing it could open permanently behind glass. The Eastern Lords had spent 45 years ensuring it stayed that way, bribing councils, turning healers away at the border, systematically dismantling every path that might have led someone like Sigrid to someone like him. Her father was merely their final tool. She was sent to the Mating Rite as a witness to a death, present enough to be seen, contained enough to be useless. A girl who carried the only cure in the north, handed to the fire with her hands tied. What they did not account for was this. Sigrid had known about the seal for 4 months. She had walked his forest in the dark, counting steps toward his towers. She had read the texts. She had built the plan. And when the great hall doors opened and the king's gray-black eyes found her across a crowded room, and paused, one fraction of a second longer than they had paused for anyone else. What happened between those two? What conspiracy is being hatched? Let's explore this story together. 6 days before the Mating Rite, the Vetrheim forest, south of Halvard's territory. Nightfall. The snow did not announce itself. It arrived the way serious things arrived, without ceremony, already present before you thought to look for it, layering itself along pine branches until the forest became something that had decided to stop being a place and become a portrait of one instead. Sigrid counted steps, 43 from the last split birch, 17 more to the ridge. She had walked this route 3 nights running because she was not the kind of person who moved without first understanding the ground beneath her feet, and the ground between her father's estate and the Halvard Towers was ground she needed to understand completely before she stepped onto it in daylight. She was 21 years old, and she had been planning this for 4 months. At the ridge, she stopped and pushed her hood back. The cold landed on her face, precise, impartial, and she let it. Below, through the snowfall and the dark, Halvard's towers pressed upward from the earth like fingers of old stone, the kind of architecture that did not ask permission of the landscape it occupied. Torchlight moved in the high windows. Smoke rose from 3 separate chimneys in thin white lines that the wind pulled apart gently. She studied the towers the way she studied everything, without hurry, without hope yet, with the clean attention of someone who needed accurate information rather than reassurance. Her left hand, pressed flat against her side beneath her cloak, pulsed once, slow, deep, the way a coal pulsed under ash when the wind reached it. She had been trying to understand the pulse since childhood, and had arrived, at 21, at the conclusion that the gift knew things before she did. She was learning to treat this as useful information rather than unsettling interference. The third text had said it clearly. The seal responds to the healing gift carried in the old blood. To the gift freely given, by one who understands what they are giving and gives it anyway. She understood what she would be giving. The question she had not yet answered, the only question that remained, was whether she was ready to give it to a man she had never met, in a hall full of people watching, with her father standing 10 feet away, and everything she had built this plan on balanced on the answer. 2 slow breaths. She memorized the towers. She turned back into the dark. 6 days, she thought. Do not hope too much. She was already hoping. The same night, A hunting lodge at the northern edge of the Vetraheim forest. Midnight. The fire had burned to coals, and still he had not moved to rebuild it. Eirik stood at the window with both hands on the sill and watched the snow come down through the dark. The cold came through the stone casement in a steady, patient way, not aggressive, simply present, and he let it come, because the cold was honest. The cold did not perform anything. It simply was what it was and exerted its influence without apology. He was 27 years old and had ruled for 4 years and had not felt anything in 5. The seal had been placed when he was 22, 6 months into his kingship, before he had learned what kind of king he was going to be. The old vulva Hela had come to his private chamber in the hour before dawn and spoken without preamble, in the voice she used when she was not asking a question, but answering one he had not yet known to form. The blood of the first Eirik carries a seal. You will rule. You will see clearly. You will feel nothing for the ones you take to your bed, and they will leave as they have always left, and the seal will hold until something breaks it from the outside. He had not asked what could break it. He had been 22 and had spent his first 6 months as king, managing a border crisis and 2 succession challenges. And he had thought, with the certainty of a young man who had not yet learned where his certainties ended, that he did not require breaking. He understood now what it felt like from the inside. Not cruelty. Not coldness in the way people meant when they used that word about him, as though it were choice. It was glass. The things that should move him were visible through it. A child's laugh, a woman's grief, the specific beauty of snowfall on black water. And he could name them, understand them, form correct responses. But they did not reach him. The glass was absolute. 2 wives had come in 4 years, both women of sense and composure who had arrived hopeful and departed quietly, with lands and funds, and the expression of people who had finally understood that the problem was not solvable by trying harder. He had not tried to stop either of them leaving. He had not, if he was honest, tried very hard at all. His council wanted him to attend the Mating Rite. He had refused for 2 years. He said aloud to the empty room, to no one, "I will go." The fire coals offered no opinion. He turned from the window and rebuilt the fire with efficient, mechanical movements, the way he did most things now, correctly and without investment, and went to bed. Outside, in a forest 12 leagues south, a young woman with dark amber hair was counting steps toward his towers in the snow, and had been hoping for 4 months, and would not stop until she had reason to. 4 days before the rite. Vetraheim's winter market. The market smelled of tallow, salted meat, and the particular cold wood smoke that came from fires kept burning all day in open air. Sigrid moved between the stalls with a basket she did not intend to fill, wearing her plain brown wool rather than her good cloak, a decision she had made deliberately, because plain brown wool was invisible in a market crowd, in a way that good cloak was not. The man in the dark wool had been 20 paces behind her since the gatehouse. He was skilled. He never closed the gap, never fell too far back, moved with the peripheral naturalness of a man who had spent years practicing not being watched. But he had the posture of someone trained to stand at attention, the specific straightness of the spine that men forgot to release when they stopped being soldiers and started being spies. And posture was the one thing people forgot to disguise, because it lived in the body rather than the mind. She stopped at the amber stall and lifted a pendant toward the gray sky, tilting it as though studying the color. In the curved surface of the amber, she found his reflection. Broad shoulders, a brooch at the collar made of cast iron, in a shape she needed to see more clearly. She took 2 steps left, still holding the pendant. The brooch caught the flat winter light. A wolf's head. Not the General Halvard device, the specific inner household mark, the one reserved for the king's personal staff. She set the amber down with a small smile at the merchant and continued through the crowd. Behind her ribs, something moved. Not fear. She had known fear at 9 years old when she healed her mother's fever, and her hands had glowed, and she hadn't known how to stop them. This was different. This was the aliveness of a plan meeting its first confirmation. He will be there, she thought. He is already watching. She bought a spool of thread she did not need and walked home through the snow, thinking about what she still had to prepare. The day of the rite, Halvard's great hall, evening. The hall had been built by a king who understood that architecture was a form of argument. The ceiling beams were black oak, sea dark from 2 centuries of torch smoke, so high they were nearly lost in shadow. The iron chandeliers were generous with their tallow light, but ungentle with it. They illuminated everything directly, without flattery, which was a political choice as much as a practical one. The stone walls held wolf pelts on iron hooks. The floor was slate, worn smooth by generations of feet. Sigrid stood on the raised platform with 4 other women and kept her spine straight, her chin level, and her eyes moving steadily across the assembled crowd. She catalogued. Merchants at the back, come to observe. Lesser lords in the middle rows, come to calculate. Higher lords at the front, where the invitation had made attendance mandatory. She noted who stood close to whom, who spoke to whom, which men's eyes moved to the platform with assessment and which with appetite. Different things, worth distinguishing. She was looking for one face. She had heard it described in the particular way women described it across the north, with the careful cadence of people attempting objectivity and not quite achieving it, and had discounted the descriptions as unreliable. Descriptions that arrived through admiration were always distorted by it. She would form her own assessment when she had the original in front of her. The great doors had not yet opened. To her left, a woman in blue wool was weeping quietly, looking at the floor. At the platform's far end, another woman looked past the crowd at something that existed only for her. Sigrid understood both responses. She simply did not share them. Fear was a reasonable response to this situation. She had just, after 4 months of preparation, run out of useful things for fear to do. Her left palm, pressed flat against her thigh, pulsed once, deeper than usual. Whatever happens, she told herself, do not look at the floor. Moments later, the same hall. The great doors opened both halves at once. The hall went silent the way a room went silent when something entered it that the room had not been designed to contain. Not loudly, but completely, all at once, like a candle going out. He walked through at the pace of a man who had decided on a direction and saw no reason to hurry toward it or away from it. He was tall in the way that required rooms to recalibrate, broad at the shoulder in the way that came from years of genuine use rather than ceremony, built with the specific density of someone whose ancestors had carried weight in cold weather for generations. His hair was dark as wet iron, braided back from a face made of angles, jaw, cheekbone, brow, assembled in an arrangement that went past what women in the market had meant when they called it handsome, past that into something older and more structural, the kind of face that would look essentially the same at 40 as at 20, because it had been built for duration rather than youth. His eyes swept the platform, storm slate, gray-black, with a depth at the center that made people look away when he held their gaze. When they moved across the line of women, unhurried, deliberate, and arrived at Sigrid and paused, 1 fraction of a second longer than they had paused for anyone else, she felt it, not as a look, but as a physical weight, brief, precise. The attention of something very large and very still, turning, and finding, and holding. That, she thought, with the cold clarity of 4 months of preparation meeting its conclusion, is the man I came here for. In her left palm, the warmth surged once, deeper than she had ever felt it. Not in response to damage, in response to something else entirely. Something that recognized him before she had finished deciding what she thought of him. She held his gaze and did not look at the floor. He said, "That one." 2 words, controlled, carrying to every corner of the hall in a voice that did not need to be loud to reach everything it intended to reach. Her father went white. That same night. The road from Vettheim to Halvard, a closed carriage. She had been helped into Halvard's own carriage before she could speak to anyone. This was, she observed, probably deliberate. The carriage was oak-paneled, iron-fitted, lined with dark fur. Through the narrow window, snow-covered pines moved past in irregular dark silhouettes, and beyond them, nothing. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her mind working through the variables. He had said that one, without consulting her father, without asking about terms or dowry, without, as far as she could tell, any prior knowledge of her gift. Her father had spent 14 years ensuring the gift was not knowledge that traveled, and his precautions had been thorough in the way of men who understood what they were protecting. He had not even spoken to her. He had walked the platform and stopped at her end and said 2 words. Because you were the only person on that platform who looked at me like a problem worth solving, he would tell her later. She did not know this yet. She had only the action and its absence of explanation, and she was thinking about what combination of sealed instinct and old blood magic had caused a man in whom love was sealed out to make a choice that her 4 months of planning had been betting on. Either he already knew what she carried, or something in him had recognized it before he did. Neither explanation required certainty. Both required her to get inside Halvard's walls, which was happening now, which meant the plan was proceeding. She pressed her warm palm flat against her knee and looked at the towers rising ahead. Old black stone against a snow-lit sky, planted the way only very old things were planted, with roots that went down to bedrock. One step at a time, she told herself. Get inside. Learn the shape of things. Then move, late that same night. Eric's study, East Tower. The study smelled of beeswax, old vellum, and beneath both, pine resin, iron, the smell of a life conducted with consistent seriousness. Shelves ran floor to ceiling on 3 walls, bowed under the weight of bound records. The large central table was scarred by decades of actual use. The fire burned evenly in the stone hearth, well-fed, without drama. He was at the table with a parchment when she entered, and finished reading the paragraph before he looked up. In firelight, the gray-black of his eyes collapsed towards something darker. Not cold, contained. The depth of water in a narrow vessel. Sigrid sat across from him without being invited. You chose me without seeing the gift, she said. Yes. Without speaking to my father about terms. Also yes. Why? He set the parchment down and looked at her with the attention she would come to recognize over the following weeks as the way he looked at everything he considered worth his full engagement. Not hard, not calculating, but complete. The look of a man who had decided that partial attention was a form of disrespect. Because you were the only person on that platform, he said, who looked at me as though I were a problem to be solved, rather than a source of fear or hope. She had prepared for negotiation. She had not prepared for honesty, delivered with that particular directness. That is a strange reason to select a wife, she said. I am in a strange position, and I suspect you already know something about it. She reached toward him with the gift, not choosing to, simply not stopping it from happening, the way she didn't stop breathing, and felt what it always found in him, a closed door, large, deliberate, ancient, built from grief rather than malice. The specific cold of something sealed from the inside. What do you want from this? She said. From this marriage. He was quiet for a long time. The candle between them shifted once in a draught and steadied. I want, he said, placing each word with the care of a man not accustomed to saying this. Something I do not yet know how to name. That is not the answer of a man who feels nothing, she thought. That is the answer of a man who has forgotten what feeling is called. The following evening, the north battlement of Halvard Castle. She had spent the day learning, not the castle's rooms, those she would learn over time, but its hierarchies, the way the steward moved when certain names were mentioned. The order in which counselors spoke during the morning session, which she had watched from the corridor through a gap in the door. The way the kitchen staff tracked the king's movements without being asked to. A castle told you its power structure if you asked it with attention rather than questions. By evening, she had a rough map in her mind and a clear list of what she still needed. He was on the north battlement at dusk, at the parapet overlooking the fjord. The wind off the water was substantial, the kind that moved everything it touched without asking permission. It pulled at the fur at his collar, at the loose ends of his braid. He was looking toward the water, and very still. The stillness of thought rather than rest. She had begun to learn the difference. "I will marry you," she said. He turned, not surprised. "Good." 3 conditions. He waited, fully, without impatience or the performance of impatience. She had noted this already. He waited the way people waited when they genuinely intended to hear what came next. First, access to your library, your historical records, and your council sessions. Agreed. Second, whatever is wrong with you, whatever the seal is and what it means, you tell me plainly when I ask. I am not afraid of difficult information, only of being managed. Something moved through his face then, longer and more complicated than his usual economy of expression. Agreed, he said, the word carrying more weight than its single syllable contained. Third, she raised her left hand, the linen wrapping visible in the fading light. This is mine. What I do with it is my decision. He looked at the wrapping. He looked at her hand, then at her face. Agreed. I have one condition, he said. She lifted her chin. Whatever you discover about this castle, about this bloodline, about any of it. His hands had tightened on the parapet stone, knuckle white against gray granite. The first physical tell she had caught from him. The first place where his body spoke without his permission. You come to me first, before you act on it. She looked at his hands on the stone. Filed it. He is afraid of something, she thought. He wants to be warned before it reaches him. Agreed, she said. She went back down the stairs. She stood still in the stairwell for a moment, in the quiet of old stone. She had expected a king, something solid and managed and accounted for. She had gotten something more complicated than that, and she was honest enough with herself to acknowledge that the complication interested her, which was a variable she had not included in the original plan. 3 days later, the formal negotiations chamber. The room smelled of old authority, ashwood table, high-backed chairs with the Halvard wolf at each headrest, tapestries faded to the colors of things that had outlasted the people who commissioned them. Ragnvald arrived with 2 advisors and a prepared list. He was a man of medium height who had learned, over 60 years, to project more than he contained. Broad gestures, a voice pitched to carry, the bearing of someone accustomed to being the largest presence in rooms. He had been the largest presence in every room of Sigrid's life. He began to speak about her peculiarities, her history, the unnatural tendencies that made her an unsuitable choice for any respectable. Eirik raised one hand. The silence was immediate and total, not because the gesture was forceful, barely a movement, but because the hand, from him, in this room, did not require force. He was the room's largest presence without doing anything toward being so. The way certain objects were simply heavier than others without having chosen their density. We are here to finalize the dowry structure, Eirik said. Nothing else. Ragnvald pivoted without transition. He spoke about the gift, the concerns, the practical. Eirik looked at him, not through him, at him. The gray-black eyes going still, the way deep water went still, when everything beneath it had focused on a single point. Not a threat, something more specific, the complete withdrawal of any accommodation. Ragnvald rolled his parchment and said nothing more for the remainder of the session. Sigrid, seated to Eirik's left, breathed slowly and catalogued this. The warmth in her palm had surged. Not when her father spoke, not when he threatened. When the king's stillness ended the threat. The gift did not respond to danger. It responded to the presence of something that needed to be met. It had not responded to a person this way before. She filed that too. That afternoon, Astrid was waiting on the other side of the negotiations chamber door. Dark red wool, silver pins in her dark hair, the composed surface of a woman who managed her expressions the way experienced housekeepers managed large estates, thoroughly, with forward planning. She was 2 years older than Sigrid, with their father's cheekbones and their dead mother's gray eyes. The eyes had once been kind in the way their mothers had been kind. They were more careful now. "You went through with it," Astrid said. "Obviously." "He will find the novelty wearing." "Possibly." Sigrid moved to pass. Astrid's hand came out, not grabbing, simply landing on her arm with the lightness of someone who needed to stop something and was uncertain whether they had the right. Sigrid went still. Astrid had not touched her voluntarily in 4 years. "Did you know," Astrid said, in a smaller register, without the composed surface, without it in the way that made Sigrid look at her properly, "that he was going to be at the right?" "Yes," Sigrid said. Something passed through Astrid's face, the complicated weather of a person beginning to revise a belief they had held for years. "Be careful," Astrid said. She dropped her hand. She turned and walked away without looking back. Sigrid stood in the doorway. "Be careful. Not you will fail. Not you are foolish. Be careful," said in the voice Astrid used only when she meant more than she was saying. The voice she had not used since the year Bijan died. That same night. The guest chamber, West Wing. The letter had been in her left sleeve for 6 weeks. She took it out and unfolded it on the rope-strung bed and read it again, as she had read it every night since it arrived. Because she was, underneath the composed surface, the kind of person who kept reading a thing until they could not avoid what it said. It was from Gunnar, formerly of Bijan's household guard. He had been at the lodge the night of the fire. He had seen a figure, a lord by the quality of the cloak, leave through the back passage before the smoke began. He described the clasp on the cloak in careful, exact detail. A particular iron clasp, shaped like 2 interlocking rings, cast in the old way. She had seen that clasp. It was in the false bottom of her father's cedar chest, which she had found when she was 12 by accident, and then carefully pretended not to have found. She folded the letter along its worn creases and looked at the cold window. She had been carrying this for 6 weeks without finishing the thought it contained, because finishing it meant dismantling the structure on which she had built her grief. She had needed Bijan's death to mean something specific. She had needed a cause that made sense. Her father had made it available, quietly, never directly, simply by not contradicting the rumors that circled Sigrid like weather circled mountains, and she had taken it. She had needed somewhere for the grief to go. What if, she thought. And tonight, for the first time, she let the thought complete itself. What if Sigrid did not do it? What if I have directed 3 years of grief at the wrong person because the right person was in the same room the whole time? The fire burned down. She did not rebuild it. In the morning, she would go back to the estate and search her father's things properly. All of them. Every locked chest, every sealed letter, every document she had been told was not her concern. She would not stop until she knew. 9 days after the rite. The road to the forest chapel. Snow fell lightly on the bridal cart. Not purposeful, not dramatic. Just present, the way weather was present. Sigrid sat alone and looked through the narrow window at the pines going past. She had found the 3rd text 4 days ago in Halvard's library, the oldest, in a cramped, frightened hand that pressed harder on the letters, as though the writer were trying to make the words permanent through force alone. The seal responds to the healing gift carried in the old blood, to the gift freely given by one who understands what they are giving and gives it anyway. Freely given by one who understands. She had been turning these words over for 4 days. She understood what she would be giving. Not just the warmth, not just the gift's power, but herself. The decision. The deliberate crossing of a threshold. You could not give something freely if you did not understand the cost of giving it. And she was clear-eyed about the cost. Once she gave this, she would not be able to take it back. Love, and she was beginning to understand that was the word for the reaching she felt in her palm each time he entered a room, was not a strategy. It was a condition. It would remain, whether or not it served the plan. She was ready. She stepped out of the cart without assistance when it stopped and walked into the chapel under her own weight. The stone was dark and very old, smelling of pine resin and the particular cold of a space that had been sacred for a long time. The candles on the altar burned with the steadiness of things that had been here before and would be here after. He was already inside the forest chapel. The officiant had not prepared for the bride to speak first. Sigrid began before the introductory words had finished, her voice clear in the small stone space, returning from the walls. I take this man as mate and lord of equal standing with myself. I bring what is mine and ask that it be received without disguise. I promise nothing I do not intend to keep, and I ask the same in return. The officiant stopped. Looked at the king. Sigrid looked at Eirik. This was a version of his face she had not catalogued. Not the council face, not the study face, not the face from the battlement at dusk. Something underneath all of those. The face of a man encountering something that does not fit inside the categories he has built, who finds for the first time in a long time that the absence of a category is interesting rather than threatening. His gray-black eyes were open in a way they had not been before, and in the candlelight she could see, not warmth itself, warmth was sealed away, but the space where warmth would go if the seal gave way, the outline of it, precise and large and ready. He spoke his vow in the traditional form, word perfect, and at the very end, low enough to reach only her. I ask the same. 3 words carrying the work of many more. The candles moved between them once, a draft from the old door, a breath from outside, and settled. That night, the South Tower chamber. The chamber had been prepared with care, fire high, new wool on the bed, 2 chairs before the hearth, with wine on the small table between them. Eric stood at the window with the shutters cracked, looking at the dark courtyard below, not escaping. She had already begun to learn the distinction. When he stood at windows, he was thinking, not fleeing. Different posture, different quality of stillness. You should know, she said from her chair, that the gift responds to proximity. When I am near someone who is not well, in any sense, it moves toward them. I can usually direct it. Occasionally, I cannot. He came away from the window and sat in the second chair. He moved with the deliberate, space-giving care of a large man who is consistently aware of how much space he occupied. In firelight, he was more himself than in any formal setting she had encountered him in. The seal, he said, not a question. 3 texts, consistent at the center. That you cannot love. Have not since your 22nd year. Old magic. Placed deliberately. He looked at the fire. Yes. How does it feel? From the inside. A long silence. The fire cracked, a sound like a small decision. He turned back to her and said, like being on the other side of glass, from everything that should matter. I see it. I understand it should move me. A pause. It does not move me. Yet, she said. He looked at her. She held his gaze, steady, unhurried, The way she held the gift when she pressed it toward something that was not ready to receive it. Not forcing, simply present. He rose and held out one hand, open, not reaching, simply there. She put her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers with the specific care of someone who did not entirely trust their own strength. And the warmth in her palm reached toward him, and she felt the door. Not as a metaphor, as a texture. Old wood, old iron, old grief, sealed from the inside with the precision of something that had been built to last. "Sleep," he said, quietly. "The rest has time." She went to the bed, he stayed in the chair. There is something behind that door, she thought, lying still in the dark. It is not nothing, and it knew I was coming before he did. 3 days after the wedding, Halvard's library, East Tower, before first light. The library was cold at this hour, the fire laid but not lit, the narrow north windows admitting only the gray that preceded dawn. Sigrid had brought her own lamp and the habit of patience she had been cultivating since age 12, which was when the habit became necessary. She opened the 6th record book, the oldest, the vellum the color of old bone, the ink faded to the warm brown of dried earth. She read for 2 hours. She found it in a margin note, written at an angle in a faster, smaller hand than the main text. The hand of someone correcting the record quietly, without wanting to be found doing so. The seal was placed by one who loved him, and was not loved in return. She closed the door she herself had opened. She said, "If love cannot live freely in the Halvard blood, it will not live at all." The seal holds until one comes who carries light made for healing, and gives it freely, and is received. Sigrid read it 4 times. Her left palm pulsed against the table, steady, deep, like a second heartbeat. She assembled what she now knew. The woman, her name was Runa, she would learn this later from the castle's senior stableman, Oswald, had loved the first Eirik. He had set her aside for a political alliance, as men had set women aside for political alliances since the beginning of kingdoms. She had sealed love out of his bloodline, not from cruelty, but from grief. The logic of someone who has decided that if she cannot have the thing, she will ensure no one in that blood can have it either. Not rage, loss. The two were different, and the difference mattered. The seal broke only for a healing gift, given freely, by someone who understood. She turned the page. The next entry read, "The king died in the deep winter. He was 31. He died alone, and no one who loved him was present, because there was no one." She pressed her fingers flat against the page and held them there until the reflex passed. Then she turned to the next page, and the next, and kept reading until she had what she needed. That afternoon, the undercroft below the kitchens. The stone here was dark and porous, fitted without mortar in the very old way. It smelled of earth and leather and time in a way the upper castle did not. Older, less managed, closer to the ground. Oswald, the senior stableman, sat on a barrel mending trace leather. He had been doing this specific task, Sigrid estimated, for a great many years. He looked up when she came down the stairs, not surprised, precisely. The look of a man who had been waiting to see what this particular person would do next. "You are the new queen," he said. "I am." She sat across from him on an empty barrel. The records mention a seal on the bloodline, placed by a woman. Her name was Runa. He set down the leather. He was quiet for a long moment, the quiet of someone deciding. "Runa," he said. "Yes, the first king's chosen mate." He set her aside for a treaty marriage, and she placed the seal the night before the other woman arrived in the castle. He looked at his hands. She loved him. That was the material she built it from. Were there healers before me? With this gift? 3 in my years of service. All 3 felt the pull toward the king. I saw it happen. The gift reaches before the person does, as you likely know. He paused. None were permitted to act on it. My father's arrangement. He looked at her steadily. Through the Eastern Council faction. Your father holds a significant trade relationship with the Eastern Lords. Or did, before this marriage complicated it. The last healer was told her registration had been refused, and was escorted to the border before she came within a day's ride of Halvard. He picked up the leather again. There is a sealed room behind the armory, ground floor, east passage. It has been sealed since before I came to this castle. No one currently in service has been inside it. You know whose seal is on the door? He was quiet. I came down the stairs myself, she said, rather than sending someone. He looked at her, at the linen at her cuff, at her face. Yes, he said. I noticed that. He set the leather down for the second time. Your father's mark. That's whose seal is on the door. She thanked him and went back up the stairs. She stood in the kitchen corridor for a moment, in the noise and warmth of it, and thought about the battlement, about his hands white on the stone, about, come to me first. She turned toward the East Passage. The following morning, the East Passage. 4 steps of narrow stone ending in a door set at an angle. The kind of angle that required knowing the door existed before you could find it. Heavy oak, iron-banded, no handle on this side. The keyhole sealed with wax. The impression pressed into the wax clear in the gray morning light. Her father's seal ring. The one he wore at every formal occasion. The one she had watched impress itself into documents at his desk since childhood. She would know the pattern of it in full dark. She stood very still in the narrow passage and looked at it. Her father had been inside Halvard Castle. Had sealed a room in the king's own walls. Had access to the East Passage, which was not a public corridor. Which meant he had not done this alone. Someone inside the castle had let him in, given him access, kept the room from general knowledge. She thought about the Eastern faction's 40-year investment in this seal. About the 3 healers turned away from Halvard's borders before they could reach the king. About Ragnvald's trade relationships with the Eastern Lords, his specific financial interest in Halvard having no stable bloodline, no king who could form the kind of alliance a loved and loving man could form. She thought about Eirik's hands on the parapet, white at the knuckles. Come to me first. She turned from the door and went to find him. That evening, Eirik's study. The fire was high. The map was on the table. He went to the maps when he was thinking, rather than simply working. She had noted this and filed it with the other things she was learning about the specific grammar of how he moved through the world. She sat across from him, as she had every evening for 2 weeks. Not arranged, simply the pattern that had developed, the way water found its level. Tell me about Halvard's registration requirement for healers, she said. A fractional shift in his attention. Permitted with council registration. Required since approximately 45 years ago. By your grandfather's council. Under pressure from the Eastern Lords. She held his gaze. Oswald told me there is a sealed room behind your armory. My father's seal is on the door. I have not opened it. I came to you first, as agreed. The study was very quiet. The fire cracked once, and then was still. The last healer with the gift to break your seal was expelled from Halvard territory 45 years ago, she continued. The registration requirement was the mechanism. Your grandfather implemented it on Eastern faction advice, likely without understanding why they were so particular about it. She watched his face. My father's seal is on that room because someone needed the documentation inside it. The instructions for breaking the seal. To be inaccessible. He was paid to ensure it remained so. Paid to ensure any healer who arrived was turned away. Paid. She steadied her voice. To place me at the Mating Rite, knowing I would carry the gift and not know how to use it. So I would be present when you died, without being able to prevent it. Eirik was very still. She watched his eyes, the gray-black lighter at the center than it had been when she arrived. Not gold, not yet, but changed. Something behind the glass that had moved closer to the surface over 2 weeks of evenings in this room. "Your father sent you here to watch me die," he said. Not a question, not rage. The voice of someone receiving information they had been waiting for and finding that the reality of it is heavier than the expectation. "He sent me as a witness to what the Eastern faction needed witnessed. The seal breaking on its own, eventually, without help. The bloodline ending with you serves their political interest. A Halvard without a living heir serves them. They have been maintaining this for 45 years. A long silence. "The room," he said. "Yes." He rose and held out his hand. She took it. His fingers closed around hers, and through the door she had been pressing her warmth against for 2 weeks, she felt something shift. Something large and patient that had been waiting and had just been told it did not have to wait alone. "Come," he said. "I will open it." That same evening. The East Passage. The room was small, cold, and perfectly preserved. Sealed air had a quality that ordinary air did not. The stillness of a place outside of time's ordinary processes. A stone table. A clay bowl etched with runes in the old script. A genealogy scroll weighted open at both ends. And a letter, folded, sealed with the Halvard device, the wax unbroken. Eric opened the letter. He read it twice without speaking. Then he held it out to her. The seal breaks when the light is freely given, not compelled, not performed, not given as a strategy. The giver must understand what she is giving, not her ability, but herself. She must speak the king's true name aloud, the name given at birth, before the king name was placed over it. The door was closed from grief. It opens for love. There is no other way, and no shortcut within this way. She read it once. She looked at the genealogy scroll. The name was there, written in faded ink 4 generations back. The birth name given before the king name was laid over it, like a stone over a foundation. Small, old, completely different from Eric. She looked up at him. He was watching her with the look she had catalogued most carefully over the past weeks. Not assessment, not the consideration of a king managing a resource. The look of someone who had been on the other side of glass from everything for 5 years, and has felt, for the first time, the glass shift. "I need to find Hela," she said. "The old vulva. She needs to be present." "She is in the castle," he said. "She arrived this morning. She said she had felt the light beginning to move." Of course she had. 3 weeks after the wedding. The South Corridor, late afternoon. The council met in the mornings. Sigrid had attended for 3 weeks from the back corner without speaking, which had produced, she noted, a range of reactions from the councillors: indifference, discomfort, careful watchfulness, and, from old Halvinson at the table's left end, the specific expression of a man being made to revise assumptions he had held for a long time. After each session, Eirik walked back through the South Corridor, and she fell into step beside him, and this had become the architecture of their days, without being discussed. "Your left side," she said. He slowed fractionally. "You were bracing against the table on your left for the last 2 hours. You do that when the seal is pressing harder than usual." He was quiet for a moment. Then, on certain days, the absence becomes heavier. Not painful. Simply, more present than usual. More weight to it. She stopped. He stopped 1 step ahead and turned. The corridor was empty, lit by wall torches that threw warm, uneven light down the old stone. She held out her left hand. Unwrapped now, she had stopped wrapping it inside the castle 10 days ago. A small, deliberate act that no one had commented on. In the torchlight, the warmth beneath the skin of her palm was faintly visible, the way a lamp was visible through heavy cloth. "I cannot promise what it will do," she said. "I have never pressed the gift against a seal before. Only wounds." "I know. Do you trust that?" He looked from her hand to her face, and looked at her in the way she had been learning to identify, because it was different from every other way he looked at things. Not the council look, or the study look, or the window look. All of her. The particular way of being seen, that meant the person looking was not editing anything out. "Yes," he said. She put her hand over his heart. The warmth moved out slowly. Not lightning, not the abrupt heat of a wound responding. Dawn. Slow, patient, inevitable. She felt the seal fully, its age, its symmetry, the specific material it had been built from, not stone, not iron, but grief, which was denser than either. Runa's grief, not rage. The grief of someone who loved completely and was set aside, who sealed love away so no one in that blood could experience the setting aside again. She did not try to break it. She pressed the warmth against it, the way you pressed a warm cloth against a deep bruise. "I am here. Something outside knows you are in there." His breath changed, deeper, slower. His hand came up and covered hers against his chest, pressing it there with the focused deliberateness of a man working hard not to do something he was not yet certain he had permission to do. "Sigrid," he said. Her name at that volume, doing the work of an entire sentence. She looked up. At the center of his eyes, the gray-black had shifted. Not gold, not yet, but lighter. Something on the other side of the glass, moving. "Thank you," he said. She took her hand back. She walked the rest of the corridor at a normal pace and did not look at her palm, which was warm in a way that had nothing to do with the gift, and everything to do with the specific weight of his hand covering hers. 5 weeks after the wedding, the library, morning. She was reaching for a record book when she understood. Not gradually, between one breath and the next, between her hand extending and her fingers closing on the spine. The understanding was simply there, whole, complete, unannounced, the way large things arrived when they had been building for a long time. "I love him." She stood with the book in her hands and held the thought up for examination, because she was the kind of person who examined things rather than simply feeling them. She looked at the evidence, the way she had been rerouting her morning walk to pass his study, not because she needed to, but because he was usually inside it, and the study was a different room when he was inside it. The attention she gave, from anywhere in the castle, to the sound of his footsteps on stone, distinctive, unhurried, with the specific weight of a large man who knew where he was going. The way the gift moved when he entered a room, without her direction. The way she had felt at midnight in the dark corridor, with her hand on his chest and his hand over hers. The particular feeling that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She was 21 years old and in love with the Alpha King of Halvard, who had been sealed against love for 5 years, and she had been building toward this understanding since the moment he walked through the great hall doors, and the warmth in her palm answered. She put the book back. The important thing, and she said it to herself twice, clearly, was this. The love would not make her passive. She loved him, and she would break the seal, and she would do it as someone acting, not someone waiting. The gift was hers. The choice was hers. Freely given required understanding the cost and paying it on purpose, not as strategy. Because it was true, and because he was worth it, and because no one had stood beside him for 5 years, and she intended to. She went to find Hela, 6 weeks after the wedding. Halvard's main gate, late morning. The gate guard's report reached her through the steward, an unannounced woman at the outer gate, Lady Astrid Eldvind, with a satchel and a horse ridden hard from the south. Sigrid set down her book and went to the gate herself. Astrid was still mounted in the outer courtyard, held together by will and familiar stubbornness. Mud-splashed cloak, hair half loose from its pins, the expression of a woman who had ridden hard and fast, and arrived at something she had been moving toward for weeks. She looked at Sigrid when she appeared in the gate arch, and something in her face, held very tightly, went through a change that was too complicated to name quickly, but that Sigrid recognized. The specific look of someone who has been carrying a weight alone and has reached the person they were bringing it to. She had sent word to the gate, "Tell the queen her sister is here, with evidence that cannot wait." Sigrid looked at the satchel, at her sister's eyes. "Come inside," she said. "There is food and a fire." 2 weeks later, the Great Hall, mid-afternoon. The 43rd day of their marriage began ordinarily. Council in the morning, records in the afternoon, Sigrid in the library with Hella going through the old Volva's knowledge of the seal and how the breaking would work. Then, from the far end of the east corridor came the specific sound of something large and controlled, becoming suddenly uncontrolled. A heavy, managed descent. The sound of a man who felt something coming and chose the floor rather than being put there. She was moving before the thought had formed. He was on the floor of the great hall, breathing present but shallow, the seal's pressure coming off him in a way she had never felt before. Not waves, not the manageable weight she pressed her warmth against in the south corridor. A single sustained force, 5 years of sealed grief straining against its own structure. The grief Runa had built it from, pressing back against the containment with everything it had. 4 guards stood in helpless formation around him. "Carry him to the South Tower chamber," she said. Her voice came out even, which was a choice. "No one else enters. Tell the council he is resting, and will address them in 3 days. If anyone asks further questions, send them to me." She turned and walked toward the east passage. The sealed room was waiting. Astrid's evidence was waiting. Everything was waiting. She was ready. That same afternoon. 3 weeks of pressing her warm palm against the wax seal each morning, not forcing it, simply being present against it, the way she was present against everything that needed her, had softened it. Today it gave with a clean crack, like ice deciding to let go at the exact moment the temperature changed enough. She took the letter. She read it again. She looked at the genealogy scroll, at the birth name in faded ink, and said it aloud in the cold room, quietly, clearly, practicing the shape of it in her mouth. "The door closes from grief and opens for love," the letter said. "There is no other way." She stood in the cold room with both palms warm and her mind very clear. "I love him," she said aloud, to the old stone and the dark and the patient weight of what she had been building toward. Not announcing it, simply saying it as a fact, the way facts deserve to be said, plainly, without performance, to the air. The warmth in her palms surged, not painfully, certainly, like a key recognizing a lock it was made for. She folded the letter into her sleeve and went to find Hella. The following morning, the main receiving hall. Ragnvald had been sent for. He arrived in his full lord's dress, with the bearing of a man who believed the meeting was going to go the way he intended it to go. He stopped when he saw them both, Sigrid at the center of the room, Astrid at her shoulder, the satchel on the table between them. 3 expressions crossed his face in rapid sequence: surprise, calculation, and then something smaller and cornered that Sigrid had not seen there before, because she had never before been in a position to produce it. "Whatever she has told you," he looked at Astrid, "she has never understood the complexity of—" "I found the letters myself," Astrid said. Each word placed cleanly, without trembling, without flourish, without anything that was not the word itself. 4 years of grief and 3 years of misdirected anger and 6 weeks of riding toward the truth, and it had arrived at this. 4 words, plain as stone. "In your locked chest," she continued, "the payment records, 11 years of correspondence with the Eastern faction, the clasp from the night Bijan burned." She breathed once, steadily. "You killed him. You watched me grieve for 3 years, and you said nothing." Ragnvald's mouth moved. "I made decisions that were necessary to—" "For whom?" Astrid said. The fire cracked in the hearth. No one moved. Sigrid looked at her father with the calm of a person who made a decision some time ago and is now simply completing the action. "You will be held until the council convenes the trial. Your lands and title are suspended pending verdict." She looked at the guard at the door. She did not watch her father's face as he was led out. At the door, Astrid's hand found her arm, not stopping her. The precise weight of someone standing beside you. "Go," Astrid said quietly. "He needs you." That evening, the South Tower chamber. Hella was in the chair by the window, very old and very still, with the quality of something that had been waiting a precise amount of time and knew it. Eirik was upright in the bed, pale from the seal's sustained pressure, but present, his eyes finding her when she came through the door, with the focused attention of a man who has been in the dark and has heard a sound he recognizes. Sigrid sat on the edge of the bed beside him. She pressed both hands flat against his chest, the left over his heart, the right over the left, the warmth of both palms joining and flowing together. She looked at his face, the angles of it, the gray-black depth of his eyes that had been shifting for weeks, changing in ways she had been cataloging without language for the change. She said his true name, not Erik. The name in the genealogy scroll, the name given at birth, before the king name was placed over it, like a stone over a foundation. The name underneath everything. The one Runa had known and built the lock around, and left the key for in a sealed room for 500 years. She said it, quietly and clearly. His eyes opened fully. The gray-black, everything sealed inside it. 5 years of managed distance, of seeing through glass, of correct responses to things that should have moved him, began to change. Not gradually. Not the way dawn usually came to Halvard, slow and reluctant through heavy cloud. The way it came on clear mornings in deep winter. A threshold, crossed all at once. Darkness giving way to gold in a single moment that was either sunrise or was nothing. Warm, complete, unhurried gold, flooding from the center of each iris outward until the gray was entirely gone. He looked at her with gold eyes. He lifted his hand and pressed it against her face. It was warm, the warmth of a living thing restored to itself, warmth that had been there all along behind the glass and was now simply present, no longer managed, no longer on the other side of anything. She pressed her face into his palm and let her breath go. Slowly. "Sigrid," he said. Her name and his voice at that moment. Not the council name or the corridor name. The name he said when he meant all of her. The plan and the gift and the forest and the snow and everything that had been built on the other side of every decision they had each made in the dark with incomplete information. "I know," she said quietly. She did not move her hands. The warmth between them was both of theirs now, and it did not need language. And the fire in the hearth burned steadily, and outside the snow came down over Halvard's towers in the unhurried way of things that had been doing this for a very long time. 6 months after the breaking, the south courtyard, a clear winter morning. She stood in the stone courtyard with her hands open at her sides and let the gift move through her, the way she was still learning to let it. Not the single contained tool she had known for 12 years, directed by habit and necessity, but something larger and less bounded. It could read the health of a room, find the cold places in the castle's old stones, the joints where the mortar had thinned, the walls where the wind came through, and register them without being asked to. On certain evenings, it reached out from her palms and simply acknowledged the living things nearby, the way sunlight acknowledged everything it touched without preference. This morning, she closed the cut on her thumb from yesterday without thinking about it, the way you put out a candle, a natural, unhurried act. "You are not my student," Hella said, from the doorway behind her. "You are a practitioner who occasionally asks me useful questions," Sigrid completed. "You said it last week." "I will continue saying it," the old vulva said, "until you stop looking satisfied about it." Sigrid did not suppress the expression. She was satisfied. After 14 years of being told to contain what she was, she found she was in no particular hurry to contain anything. 5 months after the breaking. The council hall. Morning. Astrid entered with a leather folder, the bearing of a woman who had decided on the terms of her own presence and intended to hold them, and took the empty chair at the left end of the table before anyone could object to her taking it. She presented her qualifications: the evidence she had gathered, the testimony she had given at the trial, her demonstrated capacity for finding things that experienced men had not thought to look for. She stated that she wished a formal seat. She said this in the specific tone of someone who is not asking whether it is acceptable, but is notifying those present that it is happening. The council deliberated in the manner of councils, in circles, with considerable use of precedent. Eric, at the head of the table, the gold steady in his eyes in the morning light, warm, unhurried, entirely his own, looked at each member in turn. Then, agreed. Astrid remained in the chair. In the corridor afterward, she and Sigrid walked in the quiet that had built between them over 5 months. Not empty quiet, but inhabited. The quiet of people who have said the things that needed saying, and do not need to repeat them constantly. "I am sorry," Astrid said. She said it each time as though it were the first time. Sigrid had begun to understand this was how her sister meant it. "You are here," Sigrid said, which was the truest answer she had. Astrid was quiet for several steps. "Yes," she said, "I am." 4 months after the breaking, Eric's study. He wrote it himself, in the old ceremonial script, the form used when something was built to last. The decree lifted all restrictions on the healing gift and its practice within Halvard territory. It established a house of learning in the castle's south wing. It recognized all who carried such gifts as protected persons under Halvard law, with the full weight of the king's household behind the protection. Sigrid read it over his shoulder. She had been close enough to read comfortably for months, the distance between them having settled into the place it had apparently always been moving toward, the width of a shared breath. "The Eastern faction will challenge it," she said. "The senior members are currently awaiting trial. Their political influence is somewhat limited at present. The junior members? Let them." He looked up from the parchment and his eyes came level with hers at this distance. He had stopped being self-conscious about the gold of them 2 months ago, when it became clear she was not going to stop looking at them, regardless of how long he held still. He reached back and took her hand from his shoulder and held it, the specific habit of a man who had spent 5 years without warmth and had arrived on the other side at a precise understanding of what he was not willing to treat as ordinary. "Ready?" she said. "Yes," he said. He pressed the seal into the blue wax. 6 months after the breaking, the South Tower chamber, evening. Later, when she tried to find the right word for what the year had been, she kept returning to the same one and discarding the wrong ones first. Saved was wrong. She had saved herself first. Made the plan, walked the forest in the snow, counted steps toward his towers, stood on a platform with her chin up and her eyes open and her palm warm against her thigh. No one had come to her rescue. She had gone to the rescue herself and chosen the risk and managed the variables, and the ones she could not manage she had faced without looking at the floor. Rescued was wrong for the same reasons. Found was closer, the particular quality of discovering something you did not know you were looking for. But finding still happened to you. Finding was passive at its center. The word was chosen. She had chosen him from a platform in a hall that smelled of tallow and old stone, with her father 10 feet away and everything uncertain. She had chosen him in a forest at night, counting steps. In a library, reading about a seal she understood she could break. In a dark corridor, with her hand on his chest and his hand over hers. She had said his true name, knowing exactly what she was giving, and giving it not as strategy, but because it was true and he was worth it. And that was what the word meant. You did the thing knowing its full cost and did it anyway. And he had chosen her. From the end of a platform at a rite he had not wanted to attend, before either of them knew what they were beginning. With 5 years of sealed grief that had nonetheless turned in her direction the moment she arrived in his hall, turned, and recognized, and waited, which was the only movement the seal permitted, and which was, she had decided, enough. They had chosen each other in the dark, with limited information and no certainty of outcome, which was exactly the condition under which all real choices were made. She looked across the room at him, the map on his knee, the lamp on the left table where she had placed it the first night, his hand resting open on the armrest in the way of someone who had stopped managing what his body expressed. He looked up. Gold eyes in the firelight, warm, unhurried, his. He reached across the space between them and his hand found hers. Chosen, she thought, and choosing still.